Public transport in Australia. The public transport industry is a vital system within any society. It is critical to any economy, it fuels growth and is the foundation of any major population. This, however, does not mean the industry is free from uncertainty. Let's stop and look at the first critical uncertainty of the level of government funding. Public transport shapes the way children go to school and how the working class commute to their jobs. As it is a public service, the aim of the government is to allow the population to travel about without experiencing any forms of friction. For the year ended 2015, passenger services revenue of $712.4 million represents the cost recovery of 30% of Sydney's trains' total expenses through commuter fares. As it is a $1 million industry, the level of funding available is a constant tug of war, as there are other aspects of the nation's infrastructure that needs equal attention. So what does the future look like with high funding from the government? In this world, Australia experiences robust economic growth, as the nation will have record low unemployment rates, lower interest rates and optimal levels of taxation faced by the private sector. As a result, the government has the ability to allocate funds away into public transport service. It is a scenario that would see the nation becoming well connected by the introduction of diverse train and bus networks. Now let's look at the future with low funding from the government. This is a world where the economic situation of the country is slackening as the Australian dollar has fallen in value, interest rates are at an all-time high, with public health and education system experiencing deficits. The government is forced to allocate funds away from the public transport industry. Now let's look at the second critical uncertainty, the level of technology. Public transport in Australia has been rapidly transforming over the past several years. Emerging technology has the potential in the coming years to revolutionise transport, by making it much more advanced and personalised service for consumers. So what does the future look like with a high use of technology? This is a world where a wave of next-generation technology investments in new rail services and road transport projects delivers dramatic improvements in public transport. Customers deal with congestion easier than ever, and people can live further away from the city. Now let's look at the future with a low use of technology. This is a world where a lack of reliable, efficient and affordable public transport options and limited services are becoming major issues for the nation with slow advancements in technology. Each of these two critical uncertainties are used against each other to create four alternate scenarios depicting the possible world public transport faces in 2037. Let's look at the first, all aboard, a world with high government funding and high technology. In a prosperous and utopian society, the means of achieving and creating innovative transportation systems and infrastructure is feasible. The increase of technological advancements and the rise of creative innovators with high levels of funding and investment opens the door for innovation and fast operations. In recent years, countries around the world have been tackling the issue of climate change. The demand for renewable energy led to the increase in Australian panel fields built to generate power as a result of technological improvements. This is not only an attempt to tackle climate change, but is also to gain a strong economic advantage as Australia attempts to improve its environmental footprint. Furthermore, with tremendous technological advancement in the hands of the government, the transport industry can capitalise on this opportunity to construct the infrastructure and provide efficient services based on customer demands. Dramatic improvements can be made across all public transport coverage. Reduced congestion levels travelling during peak hours can be significantly reduced through the integration of the 3D Express coach. This mode of transportation encompasses of a two-level bus that can carry 1,200 to 1,400 passengers, while engulfing smaller cars on the road, which can travel under the bus. Now let's look at a different scenario. Let's look at rush hour, a world with high government funding and low technology. In this alternative future, the biggest private data leak in history weakens Australia's desire to be at the forefront of new technological breakthroughs. New legislation requiring internet service providers to collect the metadata of its customers attracts the global hacking community, which leads to the release of personal data of millions of Australians. This causes a national distrust of new, untested technologies, which affects Australia's overall technological advancement. As a result, public transport hasn't progressed technologically in decades. Meanwhile, war breaks out between North Korea and the US, with Australia being the victim of an early missile strike. In response, the government redirects a substantial proportion of the national budget into defence. The war leads to a substantial increase of refugee intake for Australia from the conflict zone. Australia's population growth spikes, which leads to congestion of major transport networks around the country. The situation reaches its peak when several commuters are crushed and killed by overcrowding at Sydney's busiest train platform. This results in the public transport industry receiving its largest ever funding increase. Hundreds of buses, trains and trams are deployed nationwide, but the problem isn't solved. Congestion remains at dangerous levels, with expansion not efficient and scalable to meet demand. Let's look at the next scenario, Express Line, a world with low government funding and high technology. In this scenario, the Australian public transport sector has been hit by reduced government spending. The government released a budget deficit with the high cost of a public transport reform. In response to lower available funding, the government introduces the Bus Rapid Transit System in 2020 as a low-cost alternative, although it is not a long-term viable solution. Meanwhile, government spending on healthcare and aged care has continued to escalate due to ageing of the population and their subsequent health needs. The ageing population has also led to an increase of retirees receiving pensions, and an increasing number of people are leaving the workforce to care for elderly relatives. As a result, the government revenue streams have been eroded. The current cost of living and housing in Australia's major cities creates the need for satellite cities with affordable housing that are well connected to employment hubs by rapid public transport. The government sees the need for a major public transport reform, but lacks the necessary budget to implement, and therefore resorts to privatising the industry. With transportation technology booming, ComfortDelGro creates a partnership with Hyperloop One to create the first Hyperloop in Australia, due to being successful with a New South Wales and Victorian government tender. Now let's look at the final scenario. Let's look at Derailed, a scenario with low government funding and low technology. 20 years from now, in a financially post-apocalyptic scenario, the world is hit by a second, but bigger GFC. To make matters worse, North Korea and America have engaged in a full-scale war. This sends a shockwave through global financial systems, and the Australian economy is severely impaired. As the war rages between the two brute forces, the government starts to pull funds away from the public transport sector and invest more in its defence sectors, as our nation has been one of America's oldest allies. As the government can't afford to invest in new infrastructure, we see the public service becoming privatised. Banks will be reluctant to lend money. Companies that promote technological advancement will view the opportunity cost for investing in research and development too high. Because of the recessionary economy, interest rates are soaring and consumer confidence is at its lowest, which makes it very difficult for firms to borrow money. Purchasing new trains or buses while maintaining the existing standard of the service will become unfeasible. Furthermore, as a result of the war, Australia will receive increased pressure from the UN to take in more refugees, which ultimately results in increased congestion in public transport. This means the maintained level of hygiene and carriages will drop as a result of staff cuts. As these four scenarios demonstrate, the future is highly uncertain and harder to predict as the present global geopolitical landscape becomes ever more volatile. By creating long-term alternative futures, organisations and entire industries can better prepare and anticipate future events to be more versatile and resilient to their effects.